Russia that they need guarantees for NATO and so on. Yeah, genau. And the last question: how, in general, you can say what does American government, Biden now does in this crisis, and if you are okay with it?
Okay.
So, okay. Okay, we could start.
Are you sure this is okay? I mean, this blue light.
It's a blue. I don't think it's.
I think
but it's okay.
You sure?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we can start, right?
I'm running.
Okay. So thank you very much for taking time for our interview. So now we are in München at the International Security Conference here, and 15 years ago, Vladimir Putin talked about his concerns about new world order, what should come at that time to the world, like one pole world, hegemony of USA, ongoing NATO on the east, and so on, and like lowerance of the role of OSCE. In Russia, many people think that these concerns came true to the 2022. What's your opinion to this?
So we should have been paying attention, maybe more to what President Putin had to say, because if we were paying attention, we would have asked him, why do you consider it NATO expansion towards Russia, when in fact all of these nations, former Soviet republics, former Warsaw Pact nations, all wanted to join NATO. They all wanted to join the EU, the European Union. Why is that? What do they fear about Russia that makes them want to join into a defensive alliance, and also into an organization like the European Union that improves the quality of life for people? Why does President Putin oppose that? And so I think his speech, he believes it, for sure. He believes that. But I think his interpretation of history and what was going on is incorrect. But we should have paid attention and taken him serious, that this is how he actually thinks.
Mm-hmm. But it's more about that, like Putin was talking about that the role of international institutions will go down a little bit. And what we now see, for example, that European Union, European Commission, European Council try to make steps to stay in dialogue with Russia, or maybe to make Russia to overthink some actions, but they can't do it. Like everything what they try to do with sanctions and so on probably does not work so much. So doubtfully anyway. So how do you see this?
Well, I think that we need these international institutions like the OSCE, for example, to help provide a framework for peace and security. You have numerous international organizations, and Russia is a member of most of them. But I think that the Kremlin is only interested in these institutions when they can use them to their own advantage. All right. So, for example, Russia is a member of the OSCE, but it is Russian troops that prevent the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission from doing its job in Donbass, for example. It is Russia that continues to move the administrative boundary line between Abkhazia and South Ossetia and Georgia. So I think that the international institutions do lose effect if one of the most powerful members doesn't live up to its obligation. I'm talking about Russia. But I would also say that when the United States, when we turn our back on these international institutions, if we don't respect the purpose and the other members of these institutions, I think this also lowers the effectiveness. And President Biden has tried to get the United States back into these international institutions, be a more active participant, and I support that.
Okay. So talking about new Russian politics since 2007, how do you think? Did Russian position get more stronger since that time?
Did Russia?
Did Russian position get stronger since that speech on the München conference 2007?
I think that Russia has certainly improved its military capability. Starting in 2007, Russian Federation began a modernization effort to improve all of its land, sea, and air forces. It has continued to develop new capabilities, and certainly that has given them strength that they can use to achieve whatever their objectives are. I think their geopolitical situation, I think their geographical position in an interesting way is potentially improving because of the shrinking polar ice cap. So Russia has made the announcement that this is their territory, their water. So as more ships come over the Arctic, come through the Arctic, that Russia is making claims to the routes that they would have to take. That's, of course, that's not legitimate. It's not legal. But if nobody challenges them, then they're in a pretty good position. And I think this is going to be a point of huge friction between Russia and China.
So, now we're talking about today's crisis between Russia and NATO and Ukraine. So President Biden told that Russia could attack Ukraine on 16th February, which is, thanks God, didn't happen. Nothing didn't happen. And you speaking in Congress told that attack could be after the games in Olympic Games in Peking. Why do you think so?
So, of course, it's difficult to predict exactly if there will be an attack or when there will be an attack.
Yeah.
There are many factors. I don't think President Putin really wants to launch a new offensive into Ukraine. He's already there for 8 years. They have thousands of Russian troops in Crimea after the illegal annexation. They have thousands of Russian troops in Donbass, plus the separatists. The General Staff has deployed soldiers all around Ukraine, as well as their Black Sea Fleet and other Russian Navy vessels. So it's like a boa constrictor, a snake that wraps itself around its prey and squeezes it. I think this is what the Kremlin actually has in mind. Not an attack, a new attack into Ukraine towards Kyiv, for example, but to keep the pressure until the Ukrainian economy collapses and the Ukrainian government collapses. That's the objective. I think that the General Staff knows that if Russian forces attack towards Kyiv, they will suffer huge casualties, and also they will get all the sanctions from the United States and from European countries. So that's why I think it's unlikely they would actually attack. If they do, I think that they would wait until after the Olympics, partly because President Xi, I mean, this is such a big event for the Chinese, so to me, logically, they would wait. But of course, perhaps President Putin and President Xi have talked about this. Of course, I don't know. I do think that the Chinese are starting to have second thoughts. I mean, is this the partner that we really want? That now the whole world, even Germany, has turned against them. And so I'm not sure that China is going to do much more to help Russia other than when it's convenient.
Okay, so when we're talking about Germany, how you see the role of Germany nowadays, like in this crisis?
It's the key. I mean, Germany is the key. If President Putin, when he looks across the table and he sees just the United States, then I think um, I think that he believes he can handle that. Sanctions, Russia has been preparing for a day like this. But if he sees not only the United States, but also Germany, then he knows that behind Germany is probably most of the EU. So
Yes.
now you're talking about real economic power, real diplomatic power. And Germany is the only country that can bring along most of the EU, I believe. So that's why Germany is key. And I will say, I live in Frankfurt, and it feels like the ground is shifting from the traditional German, can't we just keep talking? We have to understand Russia also. Now, every day I read something that comes from Berlin, whether it's from Annalena Baerbock or some other member of the Green Party that is really tough, but also some of the SPD leadership. I mean, Chancellor Scholz, when he was in Moscow, I was impressed. He was much firmer than maybe one might have expected from an SPD chancellor.
Yes, but he didn't say the word Nord Stream 2.
Yeah, you don't have to. I don't think he has to. Not in public. He leads a coalition government.
Yeah.
SPD, Greens, the Liberal Democrats, the FDP, and so he has to protect his left flank, just the way President Biden has to protect his left flank on making policy. And just based on what I saw from Scholz when he was in Washington, and then what I saw when he was in Moscow, and then what I hear from other people around him, I am very confident that if Russia decides to go ahead and launch a new attack, I believe that everything, including Nord Stream 2, is on the table.
Okay, there's thought also of this going to happen. The question about the Russian weapons. Do you think is Russia ready for the full war?
I think the General Staff has done a very professional job of deploying capabilities. It's a lot. The number 120, 130, 150,000, who knows? But we all see a lot of capability. What's really impressive to me is the Navy, the Russian Navy, from the Black Sea Fleet, as well as the vessels that came from the Caspian Sea last year to Azov Sea. They never left. They're still there. And then, of course, we all watched these additional 7 or 8 ships come from the Baltic up through the Straits into the Black Sea. So it's pretty crowded. I mean, that's a lot of capability. It certainly is enough to launch multiple amphibious operations. It certainly is enough to completely isolate Ukraine from the Black Sea. And for me, I think this is the purpose, to wreck Ukraine's economy. And so to block Odessa, to block Kherson, to block Mariupol, to block Berdyansk, so Ukraine cannot export anything. Even though it sits on top of most of the agriculture for Europe, it sits on top of huge amounts of coal and iron ore and other important materials that can't export.
Is it that snake move that you mentioned before?
Yes, this is part of the boa constrictor that is going to squeeze Ukraine. They have, of course, cyber, which we are already seeing. Ukrainians have captured at least 3 different groups of sabotage teams from Belarus, Transnistria, and Chechnya. We've already captured them, so that means there's probably others that are out there. I think they are prepared to launch cruise missiles to hit important targets. But I don't think they have enough to just overrun Ukraine. It's not enough. In 1943, when the Red Army launched a counteroffensive to capture Kyiv from the German Wehrmacht, they had 700,000 troops to encircle and capture Kyiv, and it took 1 month. And Kyiv was much smaller back then also. So I don't think they have enough.
Okay, so what do you think? Quite the same question about Ukraine. Do are they prepared to full war with Russia?
I'll say it this way. They are much better than they were in 2014. Bigger, more modern, better trained, a lot of veterans experience.
Yeah.
But they still have huge disadvantage in sea, in Navy power, disadvantage against Russian Air Force. But on the ground, I think that they will be much better than people might expect, and they will inflict a lot of casualties. Of course, I hear reports all the time. I don't see anybody digging trenches on the border. You would never defend Ukraine from the border. It's huge.
Yes.
I mean, it would take millions of soldiers to defend forward, and that would not defend. That's not how you defend against a Russian attack. You have to have mobile capability. That once you see where the attack is coming, then you move your mobile forces to defeat it. So people are surprised that they don't see bunkers and trenches and heavy weapons all along the border, but I think Ukrainians know how to defend their country.
Is it possible that we could see, if the war starts, we can see the same horrible scenarios in the Karabakh, in the Nagorno-Karabakh, for example,
Sure.
with drones?
Yeah, absolutely. Drones will be a part of it. I mean, you saw in 2014 in the fighting around Donetsk, this is horrible. I mean, people maybe forgot how terrible when you put rockets and artillery on people. What happens when you hit vehicles, and what happens? And then, of course, with drones everywhere, both sides have drones. I think we can be sure we will see a lot of the same sort of video. Although I think both Russian forces and Ukrainian forces will have learned from what they saw. If vehicles are just sitting out in the open,
Yeah.
how easy they are to find and hit. So I think both sides will be better prepared to counter the drones.
Okay, thank you. So you had made an offer for Ukraine to make a strike on the bridge to Crimea. Do you still think so, that it's possible to be?
So three things. First of all, that bridge is illegal. I mean, it violates Ukrainian sovereignty. Crimea is sovereign Ukrainian territory. Nobody in the world except maybe North Korea and Syria recognize Russia's claim to Crimea. Okay, so it's illegal. Secondly, in war, you want to get the initiative. You want to create problems for your opponent,
Okay.
to make them think about something else, to get on the back foot. And so I think if Ukraine had the capability, and maybe they do. I mean, certainly the Russians know that bridge is a vulnerability, so they're protecting it with ships and
Yes.
all kinds of things. But if they had a way to destroy that bridge, even if they made the threat, then the people are having to think about how do we protect it. And then the third thing, of course, obviously this is a critical part of logistics and moving people back and forth. So that's why I think the bridge or being able to strike Sevastopol, these are things that Ukrainians, I am sure, I hope, are thinking about to change, to get the initiative.
Yes, and but that could provoke Russia to more hard actions actually against Ukraine.
Well, I would not do it as a preemptive. This would be after.
After something.
Yeah.
Okay, I see.
Yeah, you're right. That would be a very. If the Ukrainians did that before, the Kremlin would not be happy about that. But then the problem is, then they would use that as an excuse, and I think Ukraine is. I'm sure. In fact, I've been impressed with how the Ukrainian armed forces have avoided being trapped into doing something. I hear from different Russian sources complaints about thousands of Russian citizens being massacred in the Donbass, and it's total fairy tale.
Yeah.
But that's part of what they're doing, I think.
How do you think? Does Putin have a goal to set a pro-Russian government in Kiev? Is it possible?
Well, certainly, if he can get a look, his objective is to make sure that Ukraine does not become free, independent, prosperous like Estonia.
Mhm.
Okay, he does not fear NATO. He doesn't fear NATO expansion. He fears EU expansion. He fears the expansion of pro-democratic government and institutions where young people are free to reach their full potential. That's what he fears, because then his own citizens will wonder, why don't we have that? So I believe that he's going to do everything he can to make sure that Ukraine does not continue this Western sort of integration. And if that means attack, he'll do it. If he can achieve that through choke or strangle Ukraine so that the government falls, and he can get somebody in there that is more sympathetic or pro-Russia, then of course I'm sure he would try to do that. But it's interesting, nobody questions the legitimacy of the election of President Zelensky. Nobody believes the legitimacy of the election of President Lukashenko, for example.
Yes.
And most people are very skeptical of the legitimacy of the election of President Putin. So, of course, these are the forces that are competing. I believe that they will complete the formation of the Union State this summer. We're all watching Ukraine. Meanwhile, they're getting ready to put Lukashenko into retirement, I think. And then they have their own guy ready to go into Minsk. And nobody in Europe will cry for Lukashenko, obviously. And so this will be an easy task. And Lukashenko goes to Sochi for retirement. And then they continue to put pressure on Ukraine. And Europe goes, Lukashenko's gone, no invasion of Ukraine. No sanctions. And I think that's the plan.
So, you think they put figures and try to make street with them, and then okay, we just take it away, and then they already won something.
Yeah.
Okay. So, we have a question about Turkey. So, Turkey is a NATO state, and is due to your opinion, Russia should close Bosphorus and Dardanelles, Turkey should close Dardanelles and Bosphorus. Thinking about the special relations of Putin and Erdogan, is it real? Is it real? So as we thought, Turkey is a kind of a problem state of NATO, and they seem to be kind of partners with Russia. So, is it possible to close Bosphorus and Dardanelles?
So Turkey has been an ally since 1952. Of course, there have been many times where the U.S. and Turkey have been angry with each other. Greece and Turkey. Turkey is it's a difficult ally sometimes, but it's also been a consistent ally. I don't agree with many things that the Erdogan regime has done. This S-400, for example, I think is a terrible idea. But having said that, if we're talking strategy and we're talking about strategic interest,
yes,
then the United States and Turkey have got to fix our relationship. We need a healthy relationship. If we had a healthy relationship with Turkey, which means there was trust. And right now there's not much trust, not enough, because I think we have made mistakes. Yeah, we should have never given weapons to YPG. It's a terrible mistake. I think a huge mistake. So we've got to do some things to rebuild trust. If we had a healthy relationship, and if Turkey was confident that we, the United States and other allies, would protect them from huge economic retribution from Moscow, then I think they would be willing to close the straits to Russian Navy, for example, for violations of Montreux Convention. Turkey has a lot of authority under Montreux. They generally do a good job of enforcing it. Everybody understands what the rules are, but the Russians frequently violate Article 12, which is about submarines. You know, a submarine can leave the Black Sea, go through the straits, back to a base for maintenance somewhere else.
Yeah.
That's it. But of course, what happens, these submarines will conduct operations in the Mediterranean along the way.
Yes.
So these are violations. So Russia should not be allowed for maybe 6 months or something. So there should be some penalty. Now, of course, if Turkey says that, the Kremlin will go crazy, and they have a lot of economic leverage on Turkey. So this is what I mean. We have a lot of work to do to give Ankara confidence.
Well, there are so many questions I want to ask. So you talked about first that there was a mistake from United States to support with weapon for YPG. Why do you think that?
So ISIS is a terrible organization, and they're not going to change. So you're going to have to kill them or dry up their resources.
Yeah.
But ISIS is not an existential threat to America, to Turkey, to anybody. They're they can't threaten the existence of a country. They're terrible, but they're not existential. Russia is existential. Russia has not just nuclear weapons, but other things that can literally destroy a country or seize it. So this is a threat. Turkey is our ally for that. Instead, we made a decision for tactical benefit because YPG was very good against ISIS.
Yes.
All right, but they're a terrorist organization, and so we supported them.
In Turkey, the terrorist organization in Turkey.
Well, the U.S. recognizes PKK is a terrorist organization, and YPG is clearly part of PKK. So that's what I mean. I think it was a mistake, and you know. There's and I don't forgive many of the things that Erdogan regime does. I mean, terrible treatment of media, for example. For a journalist in Turkey, very difficult. But I also have respect for every country that lives next to Russia or that lives next to China, for example. I mean, you have to live there.
Yes.
Norway has accommodation with Russia for obvious reasons, and Norway is one of the original members of NATO. Yeah. So I can understand why Turkey would be concerned about what happens in the Black Sea, what happens in the Caucasus, because it obviously affects Turkey. I don't think that President Erdogan and President Putin are quite partners. I think that Turkey has offered to mediate this situation, which of course Russia rejected. Turkey from the beginning has never recognized the annexation of Crimea, and they have complained about the treatment of the Tatars. Turkey is selling drones, the Bayraktar drones, to Ukraine, and now they're going to build a factory in Ukraine to make more. They're building some ships for Ukraine. So I think this is a positive development by our Turkish ally.
Mm-hmm. So now we're talking about last two questions. We're talking about Russians' offer, or I don't know how to say, Russian Förderung. So
To withdraw?
no, like Russian says, like the NATO has to go back to its previous borders, and not to get wider. Like yes, but how do you think? Does NATO needs to get wider, or it doesn't need to get wider, or it has to stay in the today's borders?
So, first of all, this is the year 2022. It's not the year 1770 or, it's not the 18th century. So Russia doesn't get to choose the foreign policy of another sovereign nation. So this is a principle that NATO defends, the so-called open door policy.
Yeah.
It's not up to Russia to decide whether or not NATO accepts new members. That's the first thing. The second thing, I would go back to a question I asked earlier. Why do countries want to join NATO? Why is that? Why do they think they need protection from Russia? Well, how is that a threat to Russia if its neighbors are running away?
Russia would say this is Western propaganda.
Oh, okay. Well, let's ask. I mean, did NATO force Lithuania to join NATO? Did NATO force Poland? Did we force Romania? No, they all were knocking on the door immediately, and there are other countries waiting, wanting to come in. Now, I think the members of the alliance, of course, will have to make a decision. Are we safer if we accept another country or particular countries? Does that make the because it's a defensive alliance. It's all about collective defense. And they will have to decide, are we more safe if we invite country X to join?
Is it possible to invite Russia to NATO?
I think that would be a terrible idea, because Russia has never demonstrated any willingness to do anything except what is to its advantage. And of course, if you have Russia there as a member, it just vetoes, like it does in the UN Security Council. So I cannot fathom any serious good reason to do that.
So it's going to be blackmailing all the time, all the structures.
Without a doubt. Look, this is what's sad. This is a country for centuries has produced some of the most talented artists, writers, mathematicians, scientists. There's so much talent that's there, and endless natural resources. Endless. Why is it that the government continues to feel the need to smash any opposition? Why is it that people are not allowed to pursue their own dreams? I think that it's a shame that the country that has so much potential is not better. It's if it was a business, they would go out of business.
So, and the last question. Or one of the last questions. How do you think, role of Biden's administrations in this crisis, from 1 to 10, and why?
Yeah, I think right now we're probably close to 8. It's the best diplomatic effort I have seen from the United States in since 1995.
Okay.
The Dayton Peace Accord, that was very hard, but it took all the nations coming together, including Russia, to get the Dayton Peace Accord done to finally stop the genocide that was happening in the former Yugoslav Republic. It's not perfect, but it took a lot of effort. What I'm seeing now from the Biden administration is that same quality and intensity of diplomacy, so that when you get all 30 nations of NATO to agree, I mean, even Germany, even Italy, even France, to agree to reject the Kremlin's demands, for example, that's hard work. And so I think the administration has done a good job here. I think we were wrong in the beginning. Excuse me. I think we were slow in the beginning to realize the nature of all of this. And you remember that it started out with deterrence through the threat of punishment. I don't think that's the best way, because that means if you can only do it after deterrence fails, and you have to make sure that everybody agrees to the punishment. I think that'll be very difficult, and of course the Kremlin knows that. But we have transitioned to more, in addition to diplomacy and threat of punishment, with more proactive deterrence. Increase the giving of weapons and capability to Ukrainian armed forces, reinforcing NATO's eastern flank. I mean, a lot of things are happening. The alliance, much more active. So that's why I think we're in a much better place now.
Okay, and the last question, like short one. What do USA and NATO expect from Germany to do in this time of this crisis? So we already touched this topic a little bit. So what does world expect from Germany now? How should they handle? Because obviously they are on the front line of international policy of European Union, and many things are depending on Germany.
Well, the Germans realize that this is a different, dangerous situation. I mean, other than Gerhard Schroeder, I hear more and more serious current and former German politicians and leaders and academics, former ambassadors, speaking much more clearly now, recognizing that Russia is the aggressor here. 2, 3, 5 years ago, would not have heard that. So that's important. But also Germany recognizes that if there is a new offensive in Ukraine, that there will potentially be millions of refugees, certainly hundreds of thousands of refugees heading west. And we've already experienced what that's like.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a recognition that this is a problem that has to be addressed before you have hundreds of thousands of refugees again. But maybe the most important thing is that I think the Germans realize that their credibility is at stake. You cannot claim to be the champion of European values, of international law, of the gesamte europäische Friedensordnung, and then just stand there while Russia smashes it. So if they don't take an active leading role here, then I think the rest of Europe is going to say, it's losing respect. And that's bad for the United States also, because we need a partnership with the European Union. And if Germany is not a strong leader within the Union, then I think the Union also becomes kind of fractured.
That's what Putin said in 2007. Then the role of international organization will go down
if there's no leadership. And of course, that's what he wants. He wants to see the EU come apart. He wants to see a wedge between Europe and the United States. So that's why I think what the Biden administration is doing is so important. Rebuilding our relationships, rebuilding the alliance, and demonstrating that we have not pivoted from Europe to the Pacific, that it's all important for the common prosperity for everybody.
Thank you very much. That was too small talk, but very, very interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the privilege.
Thank you. It's a privilege for me to be with you.
You two guys, you have a really important job.
Yes, Kat, thank you.